Jesus appeared among the disciples again. He stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." Yet the disciples were terrified. They thought they were seeing a ghost.
Centering our hearts and minds in peace is a way to feel calm within. We learn to still ourselves, to be open to unimaginable possibilities.
Jesus asked, "Why are you frightened? And why do doubts arouse in your hearts?"
Doubts play an important role in our faith journey. Facing our uncertainty allows room for our hearts and minds to be filled with healing narratives.
"Touch me and see," Jesus invited, as he offered his pierced hands and feet. Yet the disciples, even in the midst of their joy, felt disbelief.
Sometimes we are present with signs of hope long before we realize that we are not abandoned. Our hearts rejoice, yet our minds still wonder at what we have seen.
Jesus asked if they had anything to eat, and the disciples shared a piece of fish, which Jesus ate while in their presence.
Let us respond to this good news of the resurrection. Jesus shows us how to create community in the midst of feeling lost. Following his example, we can build communities of sustenance and belonging. We are not alone. We are found when we share Christ's call to peace. This is the word of hope for the people who long to hear it. Thanks be to
the
God.
living word. This next reading, when I first read it, I thought, wow, that's what I've been saying in communion so often. Let's see if you can catch it. "I will not leave you orphaned. I am coming to you. In a little while the world will no longer see me, but you will see me. Because I live, you also will live. On that day you will know that I am in my Father, and you in me, and I in you. They who have my commandments and keep them are those who love me, and those who love me will be loved by my Father, and I will love them and reveal myself to them." Judas, not Iscariot, said to him, "Lord, how is it that you will reveal yourself to us and not to the world?" Jesus answered him, "Those who love me will keep my word, and my Father will love them, and we will come to them and make our home with them. Whoever does not love me does not keep my words, and the word that you hear is not mine, but is from the Father who sent me. I have said these things to you while I am still with you, but the Advocate, the Holy Spirit, whom the Father will send in my name, will teach you everything and remind you of all that I have said to you. Peace I leave with you, my peace I give to you. I do not give it to you as the world gives. Do not let your hearts be troubled, and do not let them be afraid. You heard me say to you, I am going away, and I am coming to you. And if you loved me, you would rejoice that I am going to the Father, because the Father is greater than I." Amen.
Now, we are mixing some Luke and John today. It's always a little dicey talking about two different gospels in one sermon. Each gospel writer wrote in a different context, and each gospel writer had favorite stories and their own point of view. So we need to be careful when we're talking about two readings that come from different gospels. I'll do my best. Let's start with the Luke gospel that we shared at the beginning of worship. Though this may be a strange way to explore this resurrection, this resurrection story, I have a question to ask. How many of you have seen the videos of cats with a cucumber behind them? Not many. They were a big rage, I don't know, like 8 years ago on social media. This is what I'm talking about. So I hope I'm not going to hell for this, but I do find them funny. I also find them cruel. I think you're right, Sandy, that those poor cats traumatized by cucumbers. The explanation as to why cats react that way to a cucumber are varied. The two most common ones I've heard are that it is oblong and green and enough like a snake that the cats see it and freak out. The other is when a cat is eating, it's at peace and it's just enjoying itself. And if you sneak up behind it and change its environment, it's going to freak out. And okay, so either of those explanations, good enough for Luke 24. Seriously. So Luke 24, a lot has happened in 24th chapter of Luke. Already the women have gone to the tomb. They found it empty. Two men dressed in white, usually interpreted as angels, tell them that Jesus is risen. So they go back and tell the 11, the 12 minus Judas Iscariot, that they found the tomb empty. Peter has confirmed their story because in Luke's gospel it says the disciples, the guys, thought the gal's story was an idle tale. You don't need to go into the sexism of that. But so then two of the disciples have left town. They meet Jesus on the road to Emmaus, and they recognize who it is when he breaks the bread with them. And they run back to Jerusalem to get back to the 11 to tell them what had happened to them on the road. And while they are talking about all this, Jesus shows up in their midst. And their reaction is not one of peace. Their reaction is more like a cat and a cucumber. They are a little freaked out. Even though Jesus says, "Peace be with you," they have a little bit of a cat's reaction. The big question in Luke's gospel appears to be, are they seeing a ghost? You might remember that in one of John's resurrection stories, Jesus gets inside where the disciples are hiding. He gets through their locked doors to get into the room where they are. Luke seems to be addressing a concern that that might mean that the resurrected Jesus is a ghost and can move through walls. "Touch me and see," Jesus said, directly addressing their fears and doubts rather than a resurrected Jesus that they might be seeing a ghost. He says, "For a ghost does not have flesh and bones as you see I have." Luke frames Jesus' act of showing his wounds as not only an act of demonstrating who he is, Jesus, I'm the one who is crucified, but also as an act of demonstrating his physicality. I'm not a ghost, not an ethereal spirit. Jesus asked them if they have anything to eat, and this too seems to be a ghost don't eat broiled fish proof. I think something else might be going on here. I think there's a possibility, because I know that there were early Christian followers of Jesus, communities that celebrated communion not just with bread and cup, but also with fish. So I think there might be a nod to communion here again, just like in the Emmaus Road, the bread breaking revealed Jesus. This may be a nod to that. The other thing that I think may be going on here is simply the importance of eating together. Dr. Marcia McPhee points out meals are one of the best ways to be with people. Something about sitting down together and eating just loosens up the things that might keep us from interacting and connecting with our neighbor. I don't think it's an accident that our most important ritual and sacrament is itself a meal. I wonder too if eating together has a power to help us reach across the divide of loneliness. that so many people feel. Now, I know that some of the loneliest I've ever felt has been when I have lost through death someone I deeply loved. When my mother died, I was living alone in an apartment in Martinez. I was surrounded by a lot of people in that apartment complex, and they were all people I did not know. I had never taken the time to introduce myself to my neighbors, and they had never taken the time to introduce themselves to me. Her death wasn't a surprise. She had had cancer and been through a year of chemotherapy that was pretty awful. And when the cancer came back, she decided not to go through the treatment again. And then one morning, she died. And I didn't know the people around me, and so I couldn't turn to them for support. Thankfully, I had a friend living in Berkeley. I called him. I think I called him as much simply to say the words out loud, "My mother died," as anything. And he dropped what he was doing and came out to Martinez to be with me so I wouldn't be alone. He got me to make flight changes. I already had booked a flight back east, and he got me to change that to the next day while he cleaned the dirty dishes that had gathered in the kitchen sink. Hashtag bachelor life, I guess. And he made sure I ate. And he sat with me while I ate. He got me through that first day. I was in high school when my grandfather died, and of all the things I remember about the trip from New England down to Pennsylvania where my grandparents lived, the only thing I really remember distinctly is gathering around the dining room table in my grandparents' house. Our family of 6, my aunt, my cousin, my grandmother, and her and my granddad's pastor. And having a meal together and telling stories and laughing and crying together around the table. I don't remember how we got down to Pennsylvania. I don't remember how we got home. I don't remember how long we stayed. I don't remember where we stayed while we were there, because there were a lot of us, more than could fit in the house. But I remember that meal. I also remember being impressed by the pastor's sermon. I was surprised that he knew my grandfather as well as he did. But that feeling is what I remember. But in terms of a visual memory, it was around the table. Do you have something to eat? The resurrected Jesus asks the disciples. Could he have been helping them simply be with each other in a way they didn't even know they needed? Let's share a meal. They were there together in each other's presence in that room, but were they really in each other's company? It is so easy to be in a crowd and to feel alone. A year ago, the Surgeon General wrote an opinion piece published in the New York Times about loneliness, and soon after that, he issued a report, an official report about loneliness. In the New York Times article, he wrote, "At any moment, about 1 out of every 2 Americans is experiencing measurable levels of loneliness. This includes introverts and extroverts, rich and poor, younger and older Americans. Sometimes loneliness is set off by the loss of a loved one or a job, a move to a new city, health or financial difficulties, or something like a once-in-a-century pandemic. Other times it's hard to know how it arose, but it is simply there. One thing is clear. Nearly everyone experiences loneliness at some point, but its invisibility is part of what makes it so insidious. We need to acknowledge the loneliness and isolation that millions are experiencing and the grave consequences to our mental health, our physical health, and our collective well-being." Interestingly, well, at least I found this statistic interesting. Young adults 18 to 24 are nearly twice as likely to be experiencing loneliness as seniors over 65 years of age. I would have thought the exact opposite. So here we are, a group of people gathered together for the worship of God. And there's a darn good chance at least a quarter of us are feeling measurable levels of loneliness. Maybe more, maybe as many as a half. Even though we managed to get up this morning and, well, the people on site at least managed to get dressed. I don't know about the folk on Zoom. But you managed to get up this morning and get here to worship. And still, a big portion of us are experiencing measurable levels of loneliness right now. The consequences of this epidemic of loneliness reach far beyond the individual. Again, this is the Surgeon General, Dr. Murphy. When we are less invested in one another, we are more susceptible to polarization and less able to pull together to face the challenges that we cannot solve alone, from climate change to gun violence to economic inequity and future pandemics. He says that addressing loneliness requires reorienting ourselves, our communities, and our institutions to prioritize connection and healthy relationships. And the good news is we know how to do this. First, we need to strengthen social infrastructures. He's talking about the programs, the policies, and the structures that aid in developing healthy relationships. This needs to happen in our schools, in our workplaces, in our community programs, and really any place where people gather together. Second, we need to change our habits about our use of technology. This means doing things like putting down our phones so we can be more present to one another. It also means choosing not to be part of online dialogues that amplify judgment and hate instead of understanding. And third, we need to take steps in our personal lives to rebuild our connections to one another. Murphy says that small steps can make big differences. It could be as simple as spending 15 minutes each day reaching out to people we care about, introducing ourselves to our neighbors, checking on coworkers who may be having a hard time, sitting down with people with different views to get to know and understand them, and seeking opportunities to serve others, recognizing that helping people is one of the most powerful antidotes to loneliness. While I agree with Murphy that reaching out to others is a great way to decrease loneliness, and that caring for others is a great way to feel less alone, if you're lonely, this can be hard to do. Now, I don't know if there's science behind this, but I have a strong suspicion that loneliness and depression dance together. That spending a significant amount of time feeling lonely can lead to depression. And that if one is dealing with clinical depression, loneliness can be very hard. If you're so depressed that getting out of bed and taking a shower is a victory, it is impossible to reach out to others if that's what you need to do. So it's incumbent upon us to reach out. Which brings me to John, the reading from John. This is part of Jesus' farewell discourse. He's been talking to his disciples on Maundy, Thursday. He knows that he's going to be arrested and crucified, killed by the powers that be. And he tells them, I will not leave you orphaned. Is he saying that we are never alone? I think so. I think he's saying that God is always with us. and that at least some of the time recognizing that God is present with us can help us deal with our loneliness enough to reach out to others. I think he also is saying, if you look at the reading as a whole, that what we're to do is to fulfill his commandment. And his commandment boils down simply to love God and love each other. In fact, Maundy Thursday is called Maundy because of the mandate Jesus gave. Love one another as I love you. Loving one another is the resurrection power for loneliness. I remember playing hide and seek as a kid, neighborhood kids down the dead end that I lived on. And the only thing worse than being found right away was never being found. We want to be known. We want to be seen. We want to be heard and understood. We want to be found. And while God is always with us, sometimes what we need is God with flesh. And so we need folk who aren't experiencing loneliness to be the embodiment of that love that can help us move past it. So I think that's the invitation today, is to be Christ for others, to move us past loneliness, to help people to find their home again and to be found. As we move into this quiet time of reflection, I have two questions for you. Has this look at the resurrection power of being found unlocked one of your own resurrection stories? And if so, how might you share that story with others?